So let's say you found a skeleton. How would you tell it's a Dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey everybody, the Dapper Dinosaur here, which you probably know since you're on my channel. I am here with Otangelo Grasso and Mr. Wilford, and we're going to be having a discussion about bird dinosaur evolution. And so let's go. This is not technically going to be a formal debate, but there are going to be some opening statements, and Mr. Wilford is here to just help everyone stay on topic, on track, and prevent any excessive over-talking. And with that, I'm going to give it over to Mr. Wilford, who will tell you a little bit more about the format, and then we will just get into some opening statements. So, Mr. Wilford, go ahead.
Right, so the format is basically going to be, there's no strict time limit on the presentations because both of them are going to easily be under 20 minutes long. Once that's done, it's going to shift into, I believe we agreed to an open discussion, and following that, there will be a Q&A. Anyone, ping me in the live chat if you've got a question and tell me what the question is and who it's for. And that should be it.
Yep. And actually, you had that as a chat, and I'm going to pin that chat so that way it is always at the top.
Yes, please do.
So, you guys, there is now a pinned message from Mr. Wilford. That is the username that you need to in order to get your question reliably recorded, unless you super chat, because that's always going to be reliably recorded because it's highlighted automatically. So yeah, please do ping him. If you ping me, there's a very high chance that that question will not get through unless you also ping Mr. Wilford. So, I think we're ready. Otangelo, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Can I start?
Absolutely.
Okay. I will focus in my presentation of the dinosaur-bird connection to the origin of feeders. How do we best explain them? By evolution or design? Birds have the most distinguished, vibrant, and beautiful feeders with striking colors. Besides their exorbitant beauty, feeders are designed for maximum performance with minimum weight. Scripture explicitly teaches that God made birds and sea creatures on day 5 of the creation week. He made land animals and man on day 6. As a young Earth creationist, I believe that birds coexisted with dinosaurs. And as we have today birds that cannot fly, there were many flightless birds that are being misclassified as dinosaurs. To me, the fossil record is evidence of Noah's flood. Anatomical similarity does not mean to me immediately evidence of evolution, but as well that animals could have a common designer.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Otangelo, but did you have something you wanted to share on screen for this?
Oh, yeah. Oh, shit, I forgot. Just a moment. Okay, is it on screen now?
Yeah.
Okay, shall I restart then? If I think it's better.
You like?
Okay.
Sure, you had visuals to go along with it.
Yeah. So I will focus in my presentation of the dinosaur-bird connection to the origin of feeders. How do we best explain them? By evolution or design? Birds have the most distinguished, vibrant, and beautiful feeders with striking colors. Besides their exorbitant beauty, feeders are designed for maximum performance with minimum weight. Scripture explicitly teaches that God made birds and sea creatures on day 5 of the creation week. He made land animals and man on day 6. As a young Earth creationist, I believe that birds coexisted with dinosaurs. And as we have today birds that cannot fly, there were many flightless birds that are being misclassified as dinosaurs. To me, the fossil record is evidence of Noah's flood. Anatomical similarity does not mean to me immediately evidence of evolution, but as well that animals could have a common designer. If anatomical similarity is evidence of evolution, what to say about convergence, where phylogenetically distinct creatures have similar anatomy, like ocelloid eyes in dinoflagellates, octopus, and human eyes? Applying the same line of reasoning, that would then be evidence against evolutionary claims and point to a designer. To me, the question if birds evolved from dinosaurs is far less relevant than the question if biological complexity, in the case of my presentation, the origin of feeders, is best explained by evolution or design. In the pursuit to find answers, this quote from Behe has influenced me a lot in my own research. In order to say that some function is understood, every relevant step in the process must be elucidated. The relevant steps in biological processes occur ultimately at the molecular level, so a satisfactory explanation of biological phenomenon must include a molecular explanation. It is no longer sufficient for an evolutionary explanation of that power to invoke only the anatomical structures. Anatomy is quite simply irrelevant. So is the fossil record. A typical feeder consists of the shaft, the rachis, the calamus, the barbs, and the barbules. The barbules are attached to the barbs. The barbules interlock with each other. That's what gives the feeders stiffness. Microhooks provide the unified structure. This mechanism is similar to a Velcro connection. Hooklets are not damaged by multiple zipping and unzipping cycles. They permit aerodynamic efficient vanes in large asymmetric contour feeders. It is evident that the hook and ridge system is a key feature of the barbule system connecting the barbs of a feeder. How this came about has been the subject of a number of speculative conjectures in the scientific literature. Many have been the attempts to find the evolutionary engine to provide specific function, but the attempts are not impressive, since the array of simpler structures is difficult to imagine, let alone find in the fossil record. It is not sufficient to have barbules to appear from the barbs, but that opposing barbules have opposite characteristics. Hooks on one side of the barb and ridges on the other, so that barbs become attached by hooked barbules from one barb attaching themselves to barbules from the next barb. The quest is the origin of the arrangement which is functional only all at once. Evidence of early feeders on dinosaurs, the hard evidence of clear examples of an intermediate intricate barbule system, hook and ridge, in the veins has not been discovered. The actual evidence shows that one either has extinct fully developed feeders like Archaeopteryx or small birds looking like reptilian dinosaurs with more basic feeders. A clear example of an in-between transition stage is missing. Avian feeders are highly aerodynamic and unlikely to have been originally adapted for any function other than flight. Every bird requires a considerable array of different feeders. They are formed by the skin. If we imagine a predecessor without feeders, how did it get this array? Feeders are one of the most complex and highly intricate wonders of the flying world, the most sophisticated piece of engineering used for flight. They are an extraordinary invention and essential for birds to fly. Most of us are not aware about how sophisticated feeders are. They have a very complicated internal structure. Nothing is left to an accident. Each component, each part has a function and incorporates the best possible solution. The Darwinian evolutionary mechanisms have no sense of overall future gain other than the immediate next step. When we humans invent something, we usually do so with one particular function in mind, but feeders are multifunctional, like for flight, camouflage, courtship, thermal insulation, and water resistance. Above science paper states, Natural organisms are highly integrated assemblies. In contrast, human design has traditionally avoided multifunctioning in single components because of the difficulties this presents in the design process. One of the main reasons for the exceptional performance and sophistication of bird feeders is the feature of multifunctioning. Multifunctioning and multi-optimization are very challenging because there are more constraints in the design process and hence fewer possible solutions. Almost 90% of feeders are made of the protein beta-carotene, which is among the toughest known biological materials and tougher, and together with collagen, the most important biopolymer in animals. Keratin outperforms the best standard steel and aluminum in bending strength by about 5 times. Keratin is extremely efficient from a structural strength point of view, despite the fact that the feeder performs 3 complex functions. Keratin proteins are made in specialized cells called keratinocytes, and it involves the programmed sequential restriction and activation of different sets of genes. In other words, besides the information contained in the genes, epigenetic information is also required that orchestrates the expression of the genes which make keratin. It is not this scope to go into here, but the morphogenesis of specialized cell types like keratinocytes is enormously complex, far more than most people imagine. So how these specialized cells emerged and if evolution could be an adequate mechanism of their origin is another interesting question. Since beta-carotene is such a central component of which feeders are made of, in order to elucidate if it could be the product of evolution, we have to look a bit closer into its structure. A universal feature is the division of keratin into 3 distinct domains. They are composed of the central filament and the matrix or tails composed of the N and C terminal domains. The central filament or domain is shown in green. It has about 32 amino acids in length. That is very similar in all beta-carotene sequences. These amino acid sequences have been identified in the beta-carotenes of scales and claws from reptiles and different birds, suggesting that they have remained unchanged. The above science paper says that the central filament region of beta-carotenes is highly conserved, suggesting that this domain has changed little in the 285 million years of evolution. The 32 amino acids are not a large sequence, but the odds to have that right sequence are astronomical. Now let's even suppose that somehow the sequence would have evolved. What are the odds? If we consider that one can choose among 20 different amino acids in each of the 32 positions, it is as hitting the jackpot after 20 to the 32nd power of trials and attempts. That is about 10 to the 42nd power. That is as tossing a coin 3 decillion times and having it come up all heats in a row. In my opinion, that stretches the credibility that this is plausible and that it happened. Maybe you say now evolution is not by chance, but the selection process takes place. That's true, but gene mutations occur nonetheless randomly. The paper above from 2015 claims de novo genes are very informative in terms of our understanding of the evolution of the genome for new gene functions. Evolution continues to tinker. So let's grant that evolution produced a fully functional beta-carotene protein 285 million years ago. Now, we have still just the basic building block of feeders, keratin. Bricks don't make up the house. They have to be arranged into a precise, pre-established order to be a function. Before the house can be built with bricks, the hand workers need precise instructions of how to build the house, what materials to use, etc. So the same is with feeders. In order to build a feeder, and in the end a bird that has wings and can fly, We also need first precise instructions and plans. That depends on the precise arrangement and orchestration of chromatin looping, signaling pathways, including their ligands, receptors, and signaling molecules, the gene regulatory network, amongst many other different epigenetic codes and information and genetic information. We have to transform the beta helix chain of keratin into a dimer, a protofilament, a protofibril, and intermediate filament. Then they have to be arranged to become barbule fibers, which make up the rachis, which then in the end compose the entire complex functional feeder structure. Then the composition to have the primary and secondary feeders for flight and all the other types of feeders, and they perform the precise specific function. A long way to go. So how does this happen? What addresses this question is development biology. Feeder development is a very complicated process. It starts with micropatterning, following the formation of tract fields. Morphogenetic wave sweeps through each field, resulting in the previously homogeneous field being converted into discrete buds separated by interbud spacing. These are well-defined feeder-bearing areas of skin at specific body sites. Each tract is a set of feeders initially laid out with a regular spacing between neighboring feeders. This typically results in every feeder within the developing tract having 6 nearest neighbors arranged about it, the entire pattern forming a lattice of hexagons. Such a hexagonal arrangement of neighbors is the most efficient packing of a two-dimensional space, arising through the closest possible positioning of elements. How did that configuration emerge? By tinkering through evolution. Mesenchymal cells beneath and epidermal placoid condensate. Bud formation establishes the bud and interbud domains. Each will start a new level of morphogenesis. It is all controlled based on genetic and epigenetic information and signaling pathways. The early bud of a new feeder, arising from both the epidermal placoid and dermal skin layers, forms the papilla. Epidermal cells at the base of the papilla grow rapidly. These cells eventually double back into the dermal layer, forming a double layer of invaginated epidermal skin, the feeder follicle. Within the epidermal collar, keratinocytes multiply rapidly and transform themselves into cells full of the keratin that becomes the feeder. As this emerges from the dermal papilla, a feeder resembles a straw with a slit in one side, the black dashed line in the picture. In the initial stage of growth, a cone arrangement made from a rachidial ridge, which becomes the rachis in the fully developed feeder, and the barbs curled around with a longer circumference at the base of the cone and shorter barbs forming the tip. All this is enclosed in a keratin sheet, the lining of which is connected to the follicle as a single layer. As the plumage appears, at each feeder follicle, the cone becomes a sheet and then gives way to the feeder as it emerges from the vertex. These sheets become tube-like and are present for any new feeder, eventually generating the entire feeder in an elaborate choreography that is one of the wonders of nature. As part of that choreography, the follicle collar divides into a series of longitudinal ridges, the barb ridges, that create the separate barbs. In flight feeders, the barbs grow around the tubular feeder germ and fuse on one side to form the rachis. Simultaneously, new barbs ridges form on the other side of the tube. The development process of an avian feeders is regulated by a complicated process based on instructional assembly information stored in the genome and epigenome, the genetic regulatory network, and a series of signal transduction molecules, growth factors and transcription factors, several types of cell connections, and abundant members of HOX and feeder keratin families. Davidson, a well-known development biologist, stated. No observations on single genes can ever illuminate the overall mechanisms of development of the body plan or of body parts. It erroneously assumes that change in protein coding sequence is the basic cause of change in developmental program. And it erroneously assumes that evolutionary change in body plan morphology occurs by a continuous process. All of these assumptions are basically counterfactual. Charles Darwin wrote—
Otangelo, I just want to give you a heads up. You're coming close on 20 minutes here.
Okay, I'm finishing, just 2 or 3 slides. Charles Darwin wrote that the sight of a feather in a peacock's tail, whenever I gaze at it, makes me sick. Those plumes sickened Darwin because he could not understand why male birds were so elaborately adorned. Carl Zimmer is a popular science writer specialized in topics like evolution. He published a video on YouTube about feathers evolution and said following: exactly how feeder dinosaurs took flight is still a bit of a mystery. But if a dinosaur flapped its arms as it ran up a hill, its feeders would have helped to run faster. This led to the evolution of longer dinosaur arms that stretched out into wings. Only then, after 50 million years, did dinosaurs fly into the sky. This is silly because feeders are perfectly suited for flight and very energetically costly to produce. So now the claim is that feeders evolved for some other purpose than flight and were used later for flight. If insulation was all that was needed, hair would have done the job just fine and would not have been nearly so costly. It strains credibility to say feeders evolved for insulation. Even many well-preserved feeder samples in amber reveals a complete absence of evidence for feeder evolution. What we see in the fossil record is a variety of feeders not seen in the modern birds. So the rigorous examination of the evidence points rather towards functional complexity coming from intelligence. To suggest that this came about only through the workings of a natural selection and random mutations is not consistent with the evidence.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Otangelo. So I want to go through my quick opening, and then I'm going to take a look at a few of the things that you said. So I'm here today because I wanted to talk about whether or not birds evolved from dinosaurs, or could have, or whether we had any evidence of that. One of the things that means, though, is that if we can find a feature which both birds and dinosaurs have, we don't really need to explain the evolution of that feature in the context of a discussion on whether or not birds evolved from dinosaurs. So, for example, to give a sort of another example, if you wanted to dispute the claim that humans evolved from apes, complaining about the evolution of the hair wouldn't really get you there. That might be a good discussion for, did, say, mammals diverge from early amniotes? Then you need the evolution of the hair. If you wanted to talk about how, say, a certain clade of dinosaurs, say Penaraptora, emerged from within, the larger Coelurosauria to have stage 4 feathers, that would be an interesting discussion. And I also want to make it clear that dinosaurs, or birds being dinosaurs, is the presumptive conclusion. The main burden lies heavily on my opponent to dispute the essentially universal consensus of all scientists actually publishing in this field. There are only about 4 or 5 individuals in the entire field of vertebrate paleontology who take issue with the idea of birds being dinosaurs, but even their positions don't actually help the young Earth creationist position, because they simply say that birds, instead of evolving from dinosaurs, evolved from related pseudosuchian archosaurs, which would still result in all of the same objections that creationists might have. And so it is.
Dapper, were you going to present anything like screen sharing?
I might. Not sure yet.
Okay.
So we have the strong presumption that the consensus in science is correct. We also have the problem that birds simply are dinosaurs, so that needs to be probably overcome to some degree, although you could argue that they were separately created as dinosaurs, I suppose, but we didn't really get that argument. Instead, what we actually got was an argument that feathers have trouble evolving from non-feathers. Well, first, that's irrelevant. You see, generally speaking, birds can be roughly equated with the formal clade of Ornithurae, which is a clade of dinosaurs. But you can go all the way back to Pentaraptora, which includes the Paravian Scansoriopterigids, the Oviraptorosauria, the Dinocosaurus, and Anchiornithidae, which are all unambiguously not birds, and also unambiguously have asymmetrical feathers, complete with barbs, barbules, rachis, all of that great stuff. So it's odd to me that in a discussion of whether or not birds came from dinosaurs, we're discussing a feature which is goes far back farther. And in fact, if we're willing to talk about feathers in terms of earlier proto-feather stages, which Otangelo was willing to do in his slideshow, we have stage 1 proto-feathers going all the way back to animals like Psittacosaurus, and we have stage 2 all the way back to Calindrodromeus, both of which are actually ornithischians. So it seems like stage 2 proto-feathers is already probably ancestral to Dinosauria as a whole. So talking about feathers, it really is talking about, oh, if humans evolved from apes, then how did they get hair? The answer is, well, apes already had hair. We don't have to worry about this. It's the same question as, well, if dinosaurs had femurs, how did birds get them? I mean, they both have them. They have the same femurs. So what are some of the reasons that we know that birds are dinosaurs and descended from non-avian dinosaurs? Well, ultimately, it comes down to that same cladistic analysis, as well as the fossils that support it. Now, evolution proposes that numerous fossil forms would exist in the fossil record of transitional forms. Now, as we can see in modern times, these transitional forms don't always go extinct. So, for instance, in the modern times, we can look at, say, the pipefish, which is a cygnathid fish that's closely related to modern seahorses, but it doesn't have most of the characteristic derived features of seahorses. So, for instance, it doesn't have a prehensile tail, it swims with its tail fin rather than its dorsal fin, it doesn't have male brooding behavior or male pregnancy type behavior. But we also have animals that are more closely related to seahorses, and they get closer and closer, all the way through sea dragons and all the way into the actual true seahorses. Similarly, in the fossil record, what we find is that some of the animals that form this morphological transition do persist into later periods. We know that ornithurans probably evolved in the middle of the Jurassic, but we still have closely related groups. Like I said, the Therizinosaura, Oviraptorosauria, Scansoriopterigidae, things like that, persisting into the late Cretaceous, and in fact all the way into the end Cretaceous. So some of the animals in this morphological gradient are not going to be candidates for literal ancestors, but they represent that morphology persisting, because remember, evolution doesn't say that lineages have to go extinct at any particular point, simply that they do at some point typically go extinct. So let's take a look. So within Theropoda, there are some major divisions that we have taxonomically. And I'm going to focus on the divisions that lead towards birds. So first we have the Tetanurae, which is a very broad category that includes almost everything you've ever heard of as a theropod. Then we get to Avitheropoda, which we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on. Part of that is Carnosauria, which includes things like Giganotosaurus and Carcharodontosaurus, but who cares? Then on the other side of that, we have Silurosauria. This is where we start actually getting things that are noticeably bird-like. We have things like the Tyrannosaurids that are on one side. Then over on the other side, you get to Maniraptoriforms. This is where Ornithomimosauria starts to break away. But then getting closer to birds, we have Maniraptora. Then one side breaks away into Therizinosaura. Then the other one goes into an unnamed clade, but it contains Alvarosauria and Pentaraptora. Pentaraptora is where we really start seeing similarities. So we get things like oviraptors, which, by the way, definitely not birds. So to be a bird, you need a number of things, like actual special adaptations that Oviraptorosauria simply doesn't have. But what it does have, we know, are at least pennaceous feathers. But then we can get into Eumaniraptora, and in here, we actually do start to get these stage 4 protofeathers that link dinosaurs with birds, no matter how they arrived earlier in Dinosauria. So within Eumaniraptora, we have the Dynacosaurus. Now this is animals like Velociraptor, Utahraptor, Microraptor, as well as Troodontids. We have actual feather impressions for dromaeosaurs in the form of Microraptorines. We know they had actual asymmetrical aerodynamic feathers, and they're not birds. If you want to argue that they're birds, you're going to actually have to go into euornithines and show why they can be euornithines without having the actual adaptations, one of the biggest being the picostyle. Where's the picostyle? These animals simply don't have it. They also don't have a sufficiently rear projecting pubis. Their ischial bones are not separated like we see in actual true bird hips. There's a whole bunch of problems there. Never mind the fact that if you want to get actually into Ornithurae, you need some serious fusing of and changes to the actual morphology of the jaw to get to that ornithuran condition, where you have increased cranial kinesis. You're also getting the much bigger sternum. It's not always keeled, but it's starting to develop keels. In fact, we also have some instances of independently developing keels, potentially. Keels aren't always the easiest thing to preserve. They tend to be very thin. This is on the sternum. And so then getting even closer to modern birds, within Ornithurae, we have the Hesperornithines, which are basically modern birds, except they still have teeth, but they probably also have a beak. And so with this smooth development, with the fact that feathers are not something that develops when you get to birds, they develop far earlier. I don't see any point in going over the development of feathers because that's long before this topic. In fact, protofeathers might even go back to the origin of Ornithodyra, which would include the pycnofibers or the fuzz that you see on pterosaurs as an early kind of protofeather. So I really don't see how the feather is on topic for whether birds evolved from dinosaurs. However, if someone wanted to have a discussion, can feathers evolve? That would be an interesting discussion. And I also have reason to say that yes, they can, because we actually happen to have done pretty intensive investigation into what the chemistry is behind the ontological development of feathers. So for instance, if you actually simply apply different growth hormones, especially extra beta-catenin, and in some cases bone growth hormones, to non-avian archosaur embryos, specifically alligator mississippiensis, the American alligator, you can actually get them to grow structures that are morphologically essentially identical to stage 1 protofeathers. Now, we don't know how these would look in the adult because for ethical reasons, such embryo studies end with determination of the embryo before it actually gestates. So unfortunately, there's that. And the only big difference between these is that in these alligator-induced protofeather structures, there is less invagination than there is in typical bird feathers. But the thing is that invagination in birds is actually controlled by another set of hormones that we could apply, at least hypothetically. And so one of the things that's interesting then is that these various hormones and beta-catenins and things like that are actually not really distinct between other reptiles and birds. The only distinction is actually not in a chemistry, it's simply in when and where the chemistry is expressed. So one of the big way that embryology works is that various hormones and structural proteins are expressed by cells based on certain triggers, which usually have to do with chemical gradients. So for instance, the way you get a front to back or orientation in an embryo is that one end starts emitting more of a particular hormone, the other end is less, it's a gradient, one side is front, one side is back. The same thing will happen with feathers. Interestingly enough, when Otangelo showed the feather tracks, those are actually, interestingly enough, also present on other reptiles, but those same tracks develop into scales. And in fact, in some cases, the scales are differentiated based on which track they're actually in. So for instance, in crocodilians, you get larger keeled scutes on the dorsal tracts, whereas you get smaller, more reticulate scales on the sort of medial tracts, and you can even get even smaller, finer scales on the tracts leading on the limbs. Similarly, the same tracks occur on bird shanks, the shin and down. But in that case, they actually do turn into scales, even though they start off with essentially identical tracks. And most of this is in fact taken from a paper that's fairly recent, and as far as I know, currently uncontested, which is multiple regulatory modules are required for scale-to-feather conversion by Ping Wu et al., which was published November 21st, 2017 in Molecular Biology and Evolution. It is available for free online if you would like to take a look at it. So yeah, it also was in the issue from February 2018, but it was published online earlier. So with that, I think I've pretty much covered that. One, feathers are irrelevant. Two, we know exactly how they can develop from reptiles. They use the exact same hormones as reptiles use to grow their scales. It's just they're expressed in a different order. And we have smooth morphological transitions, which is what evolution would predict, whereas creationism makes no predictions about the contents of the fossil record, other than perhaps there should be a fossil record, which to me excludes it from even consideration. You need to make predictions. When we predict where to go to find a new proto-bird, it's not hard to do. With that, I think I'll open it up to discussion.
Yep, go ahead, guys.
Okay, I took a little bit notes here about what you just said, Dapper, and I'll reference to it. Even if birds are birds, what will still not lead to the conclusion that dinosaurs and birds are best explained by unguided evolutionary mechanisms. And you talked about consensus. Now, I think consensus in science is irrelevant. And I'll quote here Michael Crichton. He said, I want to pause here and talk about this notion of consensus and the rise of what has been called consensus science. I regard consensus science as an extremely pernicious development that ought to be stopped cold in its tracks. Historically, the claim of consensus has been the first refuge of scoundrels. It is a way to avoid debate by claiming that the matter is already settled. Whenever you hear the consensus of scientists agrees on something or other, reach your wallet because you're being had. So I don't think that I'm claiming because the consensus is that birds evolved from dinosaurs, therefore that must be true. I simply do not think this is a good way.
I didn't claim that that made it true either. I just said that it means that the presumption is that that's the case and you need to overcome the presumption. So I'm not saying that because the consensus says that birds are dinosaurs, that they are. I'm simply saying that there is a presumption there and you're going to need to overcome it. And I don't think you even attempted to.
Well, I mean, in my presentation, I have brought up that several mechanisms are essential in order to actually develop feeders. And this is a big problem because you can even have a beta carotene fully developed 300 million years ago. But what are you going to do with it? And you said correctly, the gene regulatory network is one of the essential mechanisms which orchestrates gene expression. And you need to have that information stored already in the gene regulatory networks, which orchestrates the full development of feeders starting from the buds until the feeder is fully developed. So how do you go to have that in a relative evolutionary manner?
Well, here's the thing. We're here to talk about whether birds evolved from dinosaurs. So unless you're going to make the claim that no dinosaurs have feathers, it doesn't matter. It's completely off topic. You might as well ask how birds develop their eyes, to which I'll just say, well, dinosaurs have eyes. That's a problem that is a different discussion. If you want to have a discussion about how did feathers evolve, that's great. And we're going to be talking not about birds, but about much different, well, not much different, but about dinosaurs that aren't birds, because that's where we see feathers develop. We see them in in dinosaurs that are not birds. If the talk is about how birds evolved from dinosaurs, then you need to point to things like the pygostyle, or the rather unusual arrangement of the hip even within Ornithurae, things like that. Feathers are something that dinosaurs and birds share in common, so when birds evolved from dinosaurs, they did not need to evolve feathers, they already had them. So no matter how difficult it is to evolve feathers, even if it's completely impossible, and feathers were a miracle inserted by God, it does not help us answer the question whether or not birds evolved from dinosaurs, because they already have them. I would like to stick to relevant topics.
Well, I think first of all, you need to warrant and provide good evidence that evolution drives the transition from one phenotype or organismal architecture to a completely different one, like the origin of wings. And of course, the wings that are necessary to fly, as I said in my introduction, they require barbs and ridges. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have these feeders and these features, then you cannot develop a bird to fly. So the question is, how do you explain these features by evolution?
Okay, well, let's talk about wings then, because that is actually an interesting and on-topic question, although the discussion of feathers in wings is not, because like I said, we already know that dinosaurs had these feathers before they had wings. So let's talk about wings. So wings are forearms. They contain the same bones as any other tetrapod forearm. So, you're starting with a humerus, there's a radius and an ulna. Then there are the carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. Now, in the earliest birds, these are relatively unfused And it's not until we get to close to crown aves that we see the really extreme fusion. So part of this is just going to depend on where exactly you want to draw the line with birds. Is it Ornithurae? Is it aves? Is it something earlier? Is it like Ornithuromorpha? So that's going to change exactly when we start saying that this is a birdwing and this isn't. But the thing is that we do actually have that smooth transition. So we have organisms where we have the wings, the primary feathers, coming from unfused fingers, where the primaries actually emerge from the digit 2 phalanges, the secondaries from the ulna, and the tertiary start coming in from the humerus. And then we have another smooth gradient in muscle attachment. In fact, even some modern birds don't have keeled sternums. And we can see in the difference between enantiornithines and Ornithuromorpha, the actual migration of the downstroke muscles through the torso to actually connect down and to the keel, which is a whole weird, complicated thing. But we actually have that transition. We have animals like Nogueron. I can't talk. Nogueron. Look, it's Nuguerornis. I'm sorry, I just can't say that word today. We have things like enantiornithines, like Enantiornithus. We have then early ornithurans, like Patagoopteryx, which have more and more like the actual modern condition. And all through this, we also have increasing fusion of the wing fingers in the actual hand bones, to the point where we have I don't remember the actual clade name, and it's the clade for all birds that have an alula, which is a little thumb that has its own little flight feather that sticks out, and it's used to change the flight characteristics to assist in landing and things like that. And that's one of the last stages to occur in the evolution of modern birds, is where that thumb starts to stick out and get a little feather. But all through that, we have fingers first going into close association. We know they had to be in close association even before we get to birds, because we know that animals like Velociraptor and Utahraptor had primaries coming off of their digit 2 phalanges. In order to do that, you have to keep the digit 3 phalange close and have them articulate together. Otherwise, you'll actually start pushing the feathers away, and you can actually get extra breakage. That's not going to work. And then we also know that the digit 1 is free to move independently all the way into, I think it's Alula aves. I think that's actually the clade name. Don't quote me on that. And that is why we see that through this association of the digits 2 and 3, the digit 1 actually stays the most free. And so first we get sort of a growth together of the second and third digits in a single common sheath of flesh. Then the bones start merging. And this is something that you can see actually in the fossils, and also, interestingly, as predicted by evolution, in the embryological development. Now, there is one little quirk here, which has been a potential problem for the idea of evolution of birds from dinosaurs, which is to say that is the digit 2 that you see on dinosaurs actually the middle digit that you see growing in birds. And one of the questions here is that, generally speaking, in tetrapod ontology, during embryological development, the first digit to evolve or to form is digit 3, and then the other 2 digits grow from that. But further genetic analysis, as well as further ontological studies on both birds and dinosaurs, as well as the smooth morphological change, has actually shown that there is a genetic mutation that we can identify in modern birds that switches digit priority from 3 to 2, meaning that 2 is the first digit to develop, then 1 and 3 develop alongside it, then 2 and 3 merge together along with most of the phalanges of 1, and then the actual distal phalange of digit 1 ends up sticking out there. So we actually do have a completely, as predicted, nice and smooth, everything works, going from dinosaur arms like those of Velociraptor all the way to bird wings like those of Corvus, the crow.
Okay, Dapper. I think you are talking about one of the most complex topics in biology, which is the development of new limbs. And we are talking about...
No, there are no new limbs here. These are the same limbs as before.
Yes, but you have to start somewhere. They have to grow. You have an organism which doesn't have wings, and then it has to evolve and produce wings. Okay.
Yes.
So in order to have that, you need several things to evolve together, and that is the muscular system, the skeletal system, the nervous system.
No, I'm going to stop you right there. Dinosaurs have all of these things. We're not going to discuss how those things arrived in Dinosauria. If you want us to discuss the origin of the muscular system, that's great. We can have that conversation another day. We are talking about
Yep.
dinosaurs to birds.
Yeah, please,
Okay, what
Otangelo,
the-
keep it
okay,
on topic here.
Yes, what I am saying is that the developing member needs to develop all these things which I am mentioning here. So they are still not there. So you need a mechanism, you need information, how to develop all these systems at once. You cannot have one and not the other. You need all these systems, and I will quote them here again. It's the muscular system, the skeletal system, the nervous system, the endocrine system, the circulatory system, the integumentary system, and the lymphatic system. These 7 systems have to evolve to create that new limb. They have to evolve or emerge together. And you need a lot of new information to do that. Now, if we go even lower, you need actually also to specify each single cell of that new member. And that requires 18 different specifications of each single cell that will grow in that new member.
Okay, Otangelo, I'm not sure I'm understanding your argument. I want to clarify. Are you arguing that unless we can explain the initial origin of all of these systems of organs, we cannot conclude that birds evolved from dinosaurs? Or are you saying that because all of these organs already exist in dinosaurs, we need to know how they shifted in order to get from dinosaurs to birds?
Well, you have to understand that the organismal form of a bird is completely different than a dinosaur, and
It's not.
there has to be a morph into the structure, which doesn't involve only the wings and the feeders, but the entire body needs to become lighter, the lungs and so forth. So it has to morph in all these new things. Now, if you have a dinosaur which doesn't have wings, and it has to evolve wings, it has to start to evolve a new member of its body.
No.
You need to have.
Otangelo, it's not a new member. It is a forelimb. Everything that a dinosaur forelimb is what a bird wing is.
Okay.
You don't need to evolve a new limb. You just need to change the shape of the forelimb that already exists.
Okay. In order to change the shape, you need to change all at once and evolve all these 7 systems. What happens if you evolve 6 systems and you don't evolve the muscular system of the
I'll talk about that
limb?
So one of the things about embryology is that it's amazingly flexible to changes in the developmental genes, things like Hox genes that actually produce going from a clump of cells to a full-grown organism. And one of the greatest things about it is that when you have, say, a mutation that's going to, for instance, lengthen the length of the forelimb relative to the rest, the lower arm, right? So the radius and ulna relative to the rest of the organism. So you're just going to get longer forelimbs. Because all of this growth involves things like how long various hormones are expressed and the gradients in them, when you extend a forelimb out like that, the muscles will automatically, in embryo, stretch to grow. You don't need extra information telling the muscles to grow. Having the whole thing grow as a unit because of developmental signaling pathways changing is actually how this works. And we can actually test this because when we do things like directly interfere in the actual growth and signaling mechanisms of embryological development, we can induce in the lab things like lengthening of limbs, extra digits, which still automatically come with all the muscles and ligaments that they need to be functional digits, things like that. This is not actually something where you need to print out a whole new blueprint and insert it into a genome, because the genome doesn't work like a blueprint. It works more like an origami set of instructions, where it says fold here, grow here, die here, all with gradients of chemistry that can be changed to result in gross morphological differences that all automatically happen. So, for instance, if you have a change that changes the shape of, say, the torso to give you this deep barrel chest like birds have, that is automatically going to come with all the other organs in the torso adjusting to fill that space. Now, you also talked about things like getting lighter. Well, one of the characteristics, not just of dinosaurs, but of most archosaurs, which does not actually include crocodilians because they've secondarily become denser, is that they're all particularly light. One of the reasons for this is because, at least in Ornithodyra, many of the organisms here ancestrally have air sacs throughout their torso and in their long bones. And these air sacs reduce weight and also are connected to the respiratory system, giving them a more efficient respiratory system even before we get to flying animals like birds. This is, again, one of those features that is shared between dinosaurs and birds. Birds didn't have to evolve it. They already had it before there were birds. So again, this is like asking if humans evolved from apes, how did hair evolve? Well, it was already in apes, so it's not a question we have to answer that question. It's a different question. So there's this misconception, I think, that you have a set of genes that are just for the heart, another set that are just for the lungs, and those give you the blueprint. And if you had a mutation to the heart genes that cause your heart to get bigger, your lungs wouldn't then shrink. They just push on the heart and there'd be some kind of like extra pressure in your torso. That's simply not how embryology works. In fact, I'll be honest, I have trouble thinking that you've actually read any works on embryology, because your question betrays a sort of like elementary school level understanding of how genetics and embryology work.
Well, I would say that what you just explained is pseudoscientific, superficial, and absolutely not compelling, Dapper. And that is because, as Behi said, in order to say some function is understood, every relevant step in the process must be elucidated. So you are talking here and attempting to give an all-encompassing explanation of some of the things which are the most difficult and complex things in biology, which science is studying for decades, and they are not even close to fully unravel all the mechanisms. But I mean, let's go just to what is necessary in order to add just one cell, what the specification is. You need one morphogenesis of a eukaryotic cell, the structure and shape.
Okay, hold on. Are you saying that organisms can't mutate to get bigger or smaller?
Listen, I let you talk and listen and wait until you finish.
Okay, but this really needs to be on topic.
Yes, I am on topic. What I am saying is that what you explained is not scientific, because if you have a growing limb, each single new cell that will constitute and be part of that new growing limb must be specified.
No, and that's not true.
Yes, that is true. And I will tell you here right now what is necessary to specify each single cell that will grow in that limb. First.
No, Otangelo, here's the thing. If you're right, then that means that I need a whole bunch more genetic information to be taller than another human, because I'm going to have more cells than that human, right? That is absurd on a level that I'm not even going to engage with. You are completely wrong. That is a flat earth level topic. It is simply incorrect based on looking around at the world around you, where members of the same species, even siblings, have vastly different sizes.
Permit me actually to say what I want.
Not if you're going to argue that every single individual cell needs to be programmed in the DNA, because that is insane. We're not going to entertain it. This isn't a flat earth level discussion. I'm here to have a discussion where the question
isn't going to get anywhere. It might be best to move on to a different objection that Otangelo may have.
Well, listen, Dapper, I think that I am grant you time to make your responses.
Yeah, my responses weren't insane and were on topic.
Okay, you are just classifying my response as insane without even having listened.
Because simply looking at the world around you is enough to disprove it to anyone's satisfaction. That's why.
So
you're saying the sky is green. When I look outside, it's blue.
So why do you not grant me the time to respond what I want to respond?
If you wanted to respond in a way that both actually was a coherent idea that wasn't contradicted by simply observing any population of multicellular organisms,
okay, you didn't even listen
that was on topic.
To my. Okay, you didn't even listen to my response.
Okay, I'll tell you what. I will listen.
I want to have.
If it's not as insane as I think, I will respond to it.
Okay, I want that you let me end what I have to say. And
let him finish his bit, Dapper.
Okay. And if you think it is insane, you will be free to do that. Okay, explaining organism form depends on explaining how organs, tissues, and cells form and gain shape. On the lowest level of the hierarchy, the formation of cells in a multicellular organism depends on the specification of morphogenesis of eukaryotic cell structure and shape, cell fate determination and differentiation, the phenotype or what cell type each one will become, the cell growth and size. development and cell division counting. Cells need to be programmed to stop self-replicating after the right number of cell divisions. Mechanisms of pattern formation, OX genes, position and place in the body. This is crucial. Limbs like legs, fins, eyes, etc. must all be placed at the right place. What communication it requires to communicate with other cells and the setup of the communication channels, sensory and stimuli functions of cells. What specific new regulatory functions do cells have to acquire? When will the development program of the organism express the genes to grow the new cells during development? Change regulation in the composition of the cell membrane and or secreted products, specification of the cell-cell adhesion proteins and which ones will be used in each cell to adhere to the neighbor cells. There are 4 classes. Apoptosis, programming of the time period the cell keeps alive in the body and when it is time to self-destruct and be replaced by newly produced cells of the same kind. Adopt each cell's specific nutrition demands, cell shape changes. Cell proliferation is the process that results in the increase in the number of cells and is defined by the balance between cell divisions and cell loss through cell death and differentiation. Differences in regulatory DNA. Now, if you are telling me that cell proliferation, which is the process that results in the increase in the number of cells, doesn't have to be pre-programmed, then I think you are just telling me gobbledygook and you don't know what you're talking about. Now you can respond.
Okay, sorry, I just had to unmute. Okay, so here's a few things. One is, yeah, we know that because dinosaurs grew from embryos, because they are multicellular animals that are macroscopic in scale, they couldn't have done otherwise, that they did in fact have all these regulatory mechanisms, and you're just flat out wrong that an animal's bigger than things like, you know, tiny worms and tardigrades, that the number of cells in an adult is set. It simply isn't. These things are not deterministic down to the number of cells. And also, we know that genetic mutations can change the proportion of limbs because we see it in animals now, including humans, as well as the proportion of other parts of the body. So we know mutations can change these things. So no matter how complicated it is, we currently observe organisms change their size and shape as a result of mutations. If you don't believe me, all you have to do is look at dogs, who are an amazingly diverse morphologically subspecies of Canis lupus. There is, in fact, no possibility in the real world that your current objection that this is really complicated actually overcomes the everyday routine observation that genetic changes to developmental pathways cause morphological differences in the gross morphology of adult animals. And that most species of any size above the microscopic in Animalia do not have a deterministic number of cells pre-programmed in from embryo. If we were talking about the evolution of, like, tiny roundworms, then you might have a point, but we're not. We're talking about the development of complex, large, and by large I just mean you don't need a microscope to see them, reptiles, who already, not only do reptiles not have a determined number of cells that they grow to, they also, most of them are indeterminate growers, so they don't even have a maximum size that's predetermined, although they do approach a particular size somewhat asymptotically because growth does slow down. But it's, like I said, it is absolutely, completely insane for you to argue that we need to program in the exact number of cells when we watch that not happen with essentially identical genomes today, every day, in populations of organisms. It is not an argument. It is amazingly asinine, and I'll be honest, it's a little upsetting that you even thought to bring it up, because it is below what I thought most creationists would stoop to. This is baby town argumentation. I cannot stress enough how bad that is, and how hard you should chuck that into the bin. That is not how biology works.
I think you should study a little bit more into biochemistry, as I am doing. What you are giving me is superficial explanations, which I regard and consider pseudoscience. You are not going into the molecular level. You are not using the terms which in regards of the mechanisms which are actually in play in order to instantiate these new organismal structures. So
there are new organismal structures.
So you are
involved in this.
uneducated in regards of the topic.
Potential.
I suggest that those which are listening to us, you have put the links in the description to my source, which is my private my library. There I line down all these mechanisms in detail. I suggest that people look it up, and then if they think that I am describing things inappropriately as you are accusing me, well, then they should write me, or you can write me and actually refute what I am exposing there.
All right, so first I will say, yes, there are 3 links in the description that Otangelo gave me. I do apologize because I forgot to put them in beforehand, but right before we went live, I did put them in there, so those are available to you. So my next question is, okay, neither of us are biochemists. However, when people go and study biochemistry and evolutionary biology and paleontology, they don't come away thinking that this works the way that you do. I think what you're actually doing isn't so much actually educating yourself on biochemistry. What you're doing is hunting for things that you think confirm your bias, which is to say, the already disproved and disconfirmed idea that universal ancestry is not, or universal common descent is not true, that macroevolution can't produce types of novel features, and that major groups of organisms in the world and in the fossil record are not related ancestrally. I cannot come to any other conclusion based on things like how badly wrong you get the very basics of embryology, how wrong you get the very basics of the actual cladistic structure that is the scientific understanding of birds within Dinosauria. How badly wrong, in some cases, granted, not so much today, that you even get the absolute basics of logic and how science works. Like, I had to go through a whole thing with you about why it's important to be able to falsify an idea, and that didn't seem to sink in. And honestly, it's actually kind of insulting, because look, I'm not a professional at this, you're not a professional at this, but what I am is I'm trying to come at this in good faith. And when you get to that level of misunderstanding, it is hard to not take it as willful. So while this is not entirely on topic, and I should probably be muted, why do you think it's okay to come here with that kind of attitude?
Okay, first of all, claiming that because you or we are not biochemists, we don't know what we are talking about, that is nonsensical. We
not
have
what I said.
Books. Can I make my point now? I listened to you, and I would like not to be interrupted.
Yeah,
you made several attacks.
He's muted.
And I would like to respond to that.
He's muted.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I self-educate myself. I don't have a degree in any of these things that we are talking about. That nonetheless doesn't mean that I cannot educate myself and then talk about these topics. Secondly, it is very important that we actually know the evidence, that we know what is going on in development biology, in biochemistry, in regards of evolution, all these things, to then be able to give an opinion. Yes, I am biased. I am a Christian. I believe that God created everything. I am biased. You are biased. We are all biased to a certain degree. Now, I try to be as unbiased as possible, but I admit this is difficult. But because I am biased, it doesn't mean necessarily that my inferences are less case adequate than those which infer evolution as the best explanation. Now, in regards of universal common ancestry, this isn't the topic that we are talking about now, but since you brought it up, I don't believe in universal common ancestry, and I would like to say just why. First of all, the DNA replication machinery is not homologous in the 3 domains of life. Bacteria and archaea differ strikingly in the chemistry of their membrane lipids. Sequences of glycolytic enzymes differ between archaea and bacteria and eukaryotes. There are at least 6 distinct autotrophic carbon fixation pathways. there is a sharp divide in the organizational complexity of the cell between eukaryotes, which have complex intracellular compartmentalization. A typical eukaryotic cell is about 1,000-fold bigger by volume than a typical bacterium. Subsequent massive sequencing of numerous complete microbial genomes have revealed novel evolutionary phenomena, the most fundamental of these being pervasive horizontal gene transfer. RNA polymerase differences, the prokaryotes only contain 3 different promoter elements, and eukaryotes contain many different promoter elements. Then ribosomes and the ribosome biogenesis is different between eukaryotes and prokaryotes. So there are many reasons.
All of this is getting off topic.
Yes, but since he brought it up, that's why I don't believe in universal common ancestry. Now, I suggest rather than to make personal attacks, that you actually bring facts to the table which disprove what I believe in.
Okay, Dapper, you can unmute
Yeah,
yourself.
and in regards of falsifying an idea, I want just to say something in regards.
So I can't unmute then.
Oh,
yeah, just
okay.
just to address this point, I believe that intelligent design has already proven to be true, because we as intelligent beings, we know how to make blueprints, machines, factories, computers, transistors, and energy producing devices like ATP synthase. So intelligence is a capable mechanism to instantiate these things. So this is already a proven fact, and we have these things analogously by us as humans producing them, and we see that in biochemistry, in the cell, in biology. Evolution has yet to demonstrate that there's a capable mechanism to instantiate all these things. You can answer now.
Okay, go ahead, Dapper.
All right. Well, since really I shouldn't have gone on topic, and almost all that was off topic, what I'm going to do is, because we're coming close to, I think, when we're scheduled to start Q&A, I'm just going to go over some closing thoughts, and then Otangelo can do the same, to which I will not respond. So, but since I did say before that we should probably start around 15 past this hour, that means that we have about 8 minutes. So I'll try to keep mine down to about 4 minutes, and I would ask that Otangelo do about the same, so that way we can get to as many questions as possible. Because honestly, I think the Q&A is one of the most fun parts of that. Does that work for everyone else?
Works for me.
Otangelo?
How it goes.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Whatever you guys want to do.
So, I think what we've seen here is that the objections to dinosaur evolution ranged from things that dinosaurs and birds have in common, which is not an argument against birds evolving from dinosaurs. Amazingly gross misunderstandings of embryogenesis, embryological development, ontology, things like that. Despite abundant observational and in the lab experiments on things like the growth of limbs and how signaling pathways work in ontology, just ignoring the fact that these things are true, just completely cutting huge swaths of that data field just out of consideration. And ultimately, we didn't actually get a single instance in which Otangelo pointed to anything unique about birds and tried to argue why that thing unique about birds couldn't develop from the basal anatomy of dinosaurs that are relatively closely related to birds, like Dinosaurus. So there was no attempt to talk about things like, how does the picostyle form? How does the keel form on the sternum? How do you get the sort of posterior facing processes on the various ribs of birds? None of these things were actually brought up, which is disappointing, because those are actually interesting questions, and it would be nice to talk about them. The closest we got was, how do you get a wing? But we didn't even really get to be able to define a wing, other than it's a limb that you use to fly, I guess. But, I mean, that's a smooth morphological gradient. There is no hard barrier between dinosaur arms and bird wings. So ultimately, just like every one of these discussions, it's amazing how little the creationists actually prepare to talk about the topic at hand, even when they select it. And I just wish creationists would do better and actually pick a topic that they want to talk about and then talk about that topic. If you want to talk about the evolution of feathers, propose that as a topic. If you want to talk about the evolution of the musculoskeletal system, propose that as a topic. please, this is a plea not just to Otangelo, but to creationists generally. Name the debate the thing you want to talk about. If you want to talk about something else, change the name of the debate to that and get someone to debate that topic. And that's really all I have to say in closing before we get to the questions.
Okay, Otangelo, you have any closing you want to give?
Yes, I emailed you previous to our conversation here, and I said that I would actually talk about feeders, and I like to just stick to one topic and not several different topics, and then just talk about that one. So accusing me that I was jumping from one topic to the other, that is just unfair. Then the entire body of birds is architecturally different than dinosaurs. So that transformation requires an explanation. And I have not seen any compelling explanation from you. You said that signaling pathways were growing. Now, the thing is that these signaling pathways, they store tons of information. That information has to come from somewhere. And these signaling pathways, these networks, they also talk between them together. And you need millions and millions of data, new data, to make a new limb and to specify each single cell. You need to have that information, and saying that tinkering with natural selection and gene mutations, that is just gobbledygook, that is just storytelling, that you have been brainwashed to believe that. But once you actually look into the complexity and what is required, not only genetic, but in special epigenetic information, and I have categorized 45 different epigenetic codes and languages which work together. Where does all that come from? You have to explain that. And if you cannot do it by evolution, then I am sorry, you are believing blindly in evolutionary storytelling.
Okay, and if that's everyone's closing, then we can jump into Q&A if you guys are fine with that.
I'm okay with that. Otangelo?
Yep.
Okay, so we have, I think, about 48-ish minutes or so worth of available Q&A time, although if we get through them early, maybe we'll just end a little bit early.
And although I don't have the ability to see super chats, but we did get 1 or 2 super chat questions.
Okay,
and then
I'll just grab that.
Okay, and then I have the rest that weren't super chats.
Okay, I think we only got 1 super chat question, although do remember that if you super chat now, it will push your question up to above other questions that haven't been asked. This was from Jerry Pena for $4.99. What level of education did Otangelo complete?
My profession is machine designer. I was educated in Switzerland, where I grew up and did my studies.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'll just say that I have a bachelor's in history, and other than that, similar to Otangelo, I've been sort of an autodidact.
Okay. So for the non-super chat questions, I got a list here. Most of them are on topic, a few aren't, but I still thought they were going to be appropriate to ask anyways. So to start off, John Rapp asked, question for Otangelo, what is your briefly described reason to deny that simplicity can evolve into complexity over time?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear it because the
That's
dog
fine.
was, yeah.
So
Can you
John
ask
Rapp
again?
asked, question for Otangelo, what is your briefly described reason to deny that simplicity can evolve into complexity over time?
Well, because you need tons of information which drives the making of molecular machines. These machines, they are irreducibly complex. Proteins, usually they are made of several interlocking parts which need to work in a joint venture together. And if one of these parts is not there, then you don't have functionality. So we see all over in biochemistry and in biology proteins and systems which are irreducibly complex. So these things cannot be the product of evolution.
Okay, Dapper, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, all it talks about from creationists about information theory have the fatal flaw that they never actually bother to define what they mean by information, or how they're going to measure information, or any theory as to how information could be inserted into a cell even by an intelligent agent. So all of it is just hand waving and a big fog bank of never actually defining your terms. It's basically actual nonsense in the sense that it doesn't make sense because it's not actually communicating anything real.
Can I answer to that?
Keep it brief, but sure.
Yeah, what information is, this is difficult not only by creationists, but also by scientists to describe or evaluate it or measure it. Now, when we see genetic information and the question is what it is, then we are talking about the specified complex sequence in genome which directs and the assembly of proteins or amino acid sequences. This is instructional assembly information, and we only know of intelligence which is capable to do such things like making blueprints or a floor plan to make a house. The same goes on in biology in the cell, and who claim that unguided, non-intelligent mechanisms are capable of doing so. This is, in my understanding, just storytelling.
We do have two more special, or well, one's a member chat and one's a super chat. Do you mind if I read those real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so from Vandalia 1998, who is I believe a 14-month member at the amniote level, which thank you very much. He says, great video as usual, Dapper. In 2 hours, the Venerable Bede and RJ, that's RJ Downard, will be talking about the War of the Roses on my channel if anyone is interested. So yeah, in case you guys don't know, the War of the Roses was an English civil war over who would actually be the King of England. And if you want to talk about all the crazy, complicated family relationships and all the what today seems like nonsense, but to those people at the time felt really, really important to them, I would encourage you to go check that out. RJ, of course, and the Venerable Bede are both excellent on history. So yeah, that is. And then we for $2 from Ox, who is apparently a new subscriber. Thank you very much, Ox. Otangelo, are you ashamed of being transphobic?
No comment.
Okay. I don't actually know enough about Otangelo's stances on trans rights or anything to have any comment. I'll be honest, I don't watch all your stuff. Sorry.
Well, I'm sure that's mutual.
Yeah, that's probably. I wouldn't expect you to watch all my stuff. There's a lot of nonsense in there.
Okay, so the next question we have is from Deviant Inc. TV, who asks, Otangelo, what are the diagnostic characteristics of dinosaurs, and which of these do not apply to birds?
I've not thought about that question, so next, please.
Well, I do have a quick thought, which is to say, coming to a discussion about the evolution of birds from dinosaurs without knowing what a dinosaur is I mean, it's not even like bringing a knife to a gunfight. It's like bringing yourself as a baby unarmed to a nuclear weapon fight. Like, you should know the very basics of the topic that you're discussing, and if it's dinosaurs, you should be able to list off at least enough diagnostic characteristics that, given a full skeleton, you could unambiguously identify it as a dinosaur or not.
Okay. So the next question was from Vandalia 1998, who says, question for Otangelo. If you don't think birds are dinosaurs, do you also think humans aren't mammals? If so, why?
Well, that has nothing to do one thing with the other. So I mean, I don't buy in all this kind of classification systems and so forth. I'm not studying it. It's not a topic that I'm interested in. What I focused is to understand and to unravel if the complexity in biology is best explained by intelligence or by unguided random events.
All right. I'm just going to say that, of course, cladistics and phylogenetics is the most easily observable outcome and prediction, as well as support for universal common descent. While it doesn't explain everything about evolution, it is the one thing that is, I think, one of the strongest arguments in favor of universal common descent, with or without some kind of intelligent design. So if you want to contest universal common descent, you kind of have to be familiar with it. And the idea that you would contest that without looking into it is kind of mind-boggling. Because one of the things is universal common ancestry and intelligent design are not contradictory. You can have both. So, in fact, a number of people from, ID organizations actually do, in fact, favor at least extensive common descent, if not universal common descent. So it's weird to me that someone would be interested in that topic and then not really care about the twin nested hierarchies that we can find in life that are extremely concordant with universal common descent. And I've gone on too long about a question that wasn't for me.
Yeah, I would like to answer to that. First of all,
Yeah,
I have studied universal common ancestry, Dapper. I actually listened even 9 of the reasons why I don't believe it is a compelling explanation. I had the opportunity to ask Michael Behe why he believes that in universal common ancestry. I've not seen him giving me a compelling explanation in regards of that. He was sidestepping. So accusing me that I have not studied the topic after I cited to you 9 powerful and smacking reasons why universal common ancestry is not true, that is quite frankly, simply ignorant.
Well, I mean, I guess you guys could debate some of those reasons another time.
Perhaps.
Oh, sure. Oh,
Okay. So
Fine,
this
yeah.
one is for you, Dapper. This is from Nestlig20, and he
Wild.
asked, Archaeopteryx didn't have an alula, right?
That is correct. So the digit 1, or the thumb, if you will, of Archaeopteryx is long and in line, and we have really good feather impressions from its wing feathers. So if it had an alula, it would be evident in the fossil almost certainly. I guess I can't say with 100% because there are other taphonomic artifacts in that have been misinterpreted. But we now have several specimens of Archaeopteryx lithographica, as well as I believe there's been a new species named within the genus, and in none of those have I ever seen any indication of an alula.
Okay. So the next question
Wait, does
from...
Otangelo have anything on that?
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
No, I don't.
Okay.
Okay. So next question was by Andrew Cumming, and it's for Otangelo. And Andrew asks, if I were to show that you and your cousins share a common parent, but didn't know how the differentiating mutations were selected for, does that mean you two aren't related?
Yes, we are related. So what?
Well, the so what is that this is directly analogous to the kinds of things that we're discovering in the genetic investigation of our extant archosaurs, as well as, our embryological studies about the various ways that signaling hormones and Hox genes and things like that can actually, right now, today, turn reptile scales into feathers. And where we're doing paleogenomic analysis on things like this. So yeah, it's directly analogous to that. That's why the question is important.
Yes. Is there human intervention involved in doing these experiments? That is a yes or no question.
Right, because experiments don't count when they don't work for you. Then you say, oh, experiments don't count because there's human intervention. But other times, science is all about the experiments and laboratory work. And if you can't repeat it in the lab, then it doesn't count. No, I see that double standard. Don't worry.
No, it's
That's
not
all
a
I'll
double
say on it.
standard, Dapper. The fact is that we are talking here about instantiation of massive amounts of information. And the big question mark is, of course, where that information comes from.
Like I said, I wasn't going to continue on that one because we got to get through Greece.
Okay. So moving on, this is from Jonathan H. Again, this is for Otangelo. He asks, since we don't observe kinds, quote unquote, to exist, but instead clades continue to cluster into larger clades from species all the way to domain, why does this not disprove creationism? And I assume by this, he means the fact that there's a nested hierarchy.
I'm sorry, I think I missed some of that. Could you just repeat it so I know exactly what?
Yeah, sure.
What
The phrasing is a little weird. So Jonathan H. asked for Otangelo.
Okay.
Since we don't observe kinds to exist, but instead clades which continue to cluster into larger clades from species all the way to domain, why does this not disprove creationism?
Got it.
Well, first of all, I think that adaptation or speciation of the second degree, this is a fact. This is undisputed amongst creationists as well. Now, in regards of the nomenclatures of kinds and species, we know that this is a very different thing. There is a lot of disagreement. I have not studied this, but yeah, I don't think that we can make sound inferences by debating or scrutinizing these things.
Okay, Dapper, do you have anything to add?
I'll just add that it's prima facie evidence against special creation and for universal common ancestry that we get nested hierarchies, because that's the thing that common descent gets you. It gets you hierarchies. We can see it in languages. We can see it in biblical manuscripts. We can see it in life. All of these have direct descent with modification from previous ancestors. In one case linguistic, in one case textual, and in one case genetic. So While I will say that because creationism is fundamentally unfalsifiable, and therefore not worthy of scientific consideration, it is, however, a striking example of evolution and universal common descent being shown to be accurate in terms of making predictions about the patterns that we will find in life.
I would like to answer to that. First of
Okay.
all, as I said previously, and I'm more than happy to debate on that, I think there is powerful evidence against universal common ancestry. Secondly, there are examples, powerful examples, where there is no nested hierarchy. One is oxygenic photosynthesis. Be my guest and show me how the hierarchy is nested, the precursors to come to oxygenic photosynthesis.
Okay, and we got a super chat. That's the word. I'm sorry. Today, words are just falling out of my brain, and I don't know where they're going. Sorry about that, guys. Maybe I just didn't have enough caffeine today. No, that's not true. I'm trying to cut back on caffeine. So anyway, for Tyler West for $4.99, Dapper, can you speak on how ERVs are powerful evidence of common ancestry? So it's a really big topic, and I probably can't do it justice in the kind of format of a Q&A, but I will give it a go. So ERV stands for endogenous retrovirus. So endogenous means it's already in your genetic code. Retroviruses are a group of viruses that, rather than directly hijacking your cellular mechanisms to create more copies of themselves, they actually contain some reverse transcriptase, which is a unique thing that only viruses really have, and only retroviruses, which takes their RNA, reads it into DNA, and inserts the DNA into your genome. So then when that section of your genome is transcribed, it starts producing more viral particles. Well, sometimes, for various reasons, either because of an error in the splicing or mutations later on in the host line cells that prevent this, or even epigenetic things like heavy methylation of a viral region, these retroviruses can end up actually entering the stem line of organisms without actually causing diseases and without causing further outbreaks of this virus. At that point, they're endogenous because they actually were inherited from your parent, as opposed to exogenous, which means you directly got the virus. One of the things is, though, that we can identify ERVs pretty easily because they have very characteristically viral genomes, but we actually can find them between species at various higher level taxa, right? So there are ERVs that are common to all apes. There are ERVs that are common to great apes. There are ERV, and not, the lesser apes, the hylobatids. And within that, there are ERVs that are shared by gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans that aren't shared with orangutans, which is the outgroup within the great apes. And then getting even closer, there are ERVs that we share with chimpanzees and bonobos, but not with gorillas. Similarly, there's ERVs that are unique to both the bonobo and the chimpanzee that neither one have. And there are ones that are unique to humans. And there are ones that are unique to both pan species, but that humans don't have. And it is extremely hard to imagine why a designer, other than to trick you, would insert fake viral genomes into organisms in a manner that matches the hierarchy that you would see both morphologically and from other genetics, including neutral variation and coding genes, in all of his organisms. It's hard to come to a conclusion that isn't either common descent or God is just a massive liar. And since I think there are some pretty significant philosophical problems with the God is a massive liar option, it is hard to conclude anything other than common descent when you see these nested hierarchies of ERV insertions. That's it. Sorry, I went on a bit too long. You should stop me from doing that, Mr. Wilford.
Okay. I mean, you answered the question very well, I think.
No.
Potentially,
do you have anything on that?
No.
Okay.
Okay. So, this next question was from Tesla Ranger, and this was referring to something that Otangelo was talking about earlier when you guys were going back and forth on wings and arms and that sort of thing. And he asked, is Otangelo saying that a protobird has to gain a wing limb before it loses an arm limb?
Before it loses an arm wing?
He was asking, was your argument that with a protobird, did it have to first develop like a separate independent wing limb and then lose an arm that had been there before, rather than an arm being transformed into a wing? I think is what his question was.
Well, in any case, the morphology of the bird is in its completeness completely different, and it has different requirements, the lungs and the weight and so forth, than a dinosaur. So you need to explain the entire transformation from one architectural complexity to another. And I think this is a very, very big problem. And there are clearly limitations in what is possible.
The only thing I have to add to that is that there was a yes or no question in there, and while I think it's fine to elaborate after you answer a yes or no question, I don't think there was actually an answer to the yes or no question. Or I guess it wasn't a yes or no question, it was a binary question, like which of these is actually your argument. And it would be nice if we could hear from Otangelo. Do you think that the wings and forelimbs are different limbs, or do you think that they are both the same forelimb?
I've not thought about that, so
Okay.
I pass.
Okay. This next one from Visanti, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I'm sorry if I'm not. This is for you, Dapper. They asked, do we have to understand everything about a process for it to be true?
No, actually, I don't think there are any processes that are fully understood at every possible level by humanity. We don't actually have a theory of everything, for one thing, which means that ultimately there are processes that we don't, all processes are something we don't understand because we don't have equations to fully describe literally everything going on in them. That's especially true if you're going to look at it in sort of a reductive way. But also, I mean, the thing is, we have things that we knew were truths in, say, like the 70s, right? So in the 70s, we knew that feather tracks on birds and scale tracks on reptiles were morphologically essentially identical when they first form in embryo. That remains true, even though we now know more about the actual chemistry and genetics involved in both scale and feather formation. So we understood something, and it was hinting at what later came as more information. But yeah, you don't have to understand literally every step of a process in order to be able to say that you do know some things about it and that you can draw reasonable conclusions and make predictions. In fact, that's the whole point of science, is to say, okay, we know some things. I think my idea is what might fill in the gap. Let's test it. And if it doesn't work out the way I predict, well, then my idea was wrong.
Okay. Tangela, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yes, I think it is important to establish at what point would the scientist admit, okay, I did try that hypothesis, but I have now to concede that the hypothesis was wrong. And we don't see that, for example, in regards of abiogenesis or the origin of life. It has gone on for 70 years. The problem, rather than closing the gaps, is becoming bigger and bigger rather than coming to an end and fully understand and explain the complexity. Whenever they progress, they see more and more complexity, which of course demands an explanation. But what we never see is that a mainstream scientist comes up and says, okay, molecules we have seen that rather than complexify, they devolve. This is really evidence against abiogenesis. We need to invoke a designer, or homochirality, or many other problems. We rarely see a scientist change his mind and say, okay, we have now concluded this is not a viable road to go. Let's look somewhere else.
All I have to say to that is that hypotheses in the field of abiogenesis are routinely overturned. But abiogenesis per se, like it being a thing, isn't really a theory. It is a supposition, but it's a supposition based on the fact that we know that at one point there was no life on Earth, and at another point there was. So something had to happen in the middle there to go from one state to the other. And abiogenesis research is simply investigating various hypotheses about plausible mechanisms for that. And yes, it is a very early science. It does not have all of its ducks in a row. And that's one of the reasons why I don't really talk about it. I don't feel like most of its conclusions are firm enough that I want to spend my time researching that in depth. And one of the things is because, quite frankly, if you're just going to go with, I guess it's just a miracle, I'm going to say, well, that's a little bit of a god of the gaps, but like whatever. It leaves all of the rest of evolutionary theory completely intact if the stage at which you get intelligent design is the first organism. I mean, like, okay, but you've given up virtually everything at that point if that's the only thing that you're going to hang your hat on. So, I wish we knew more, but we're working on it. And yes, we discard hypotheses all the time.
I would like to answer to that. I think, Dapper, despite all what you are saying, you are empty-handed, not only in regards of abiogenesis, but also in regards of evolution, because what we see is that instructional assembly information is encoded in at least 33 genetic and 45 epigenetic codes and 5 signaling networks on a structural level in an integrated, interlocked fashion, and that explains organism architecture. Now, this falsifies evolutionary storytelling, and that non-intelligent mechanisms can bring forward the complexity that we see in life and in biology.
I'll just say thank you for confirming what I said when I said I don't really have anything on abiogenesis because it's not something I really study. That remains true. Thank you for confirming it.
Okay. Moving on, we had a question from, sorry if I mispronounce this, Gary DeVere. Maybe DeVere, I'm not sure. And this is for Otangelo. And he asks, I would like Otangelo to explain how the feathers that Triceratops had fit into his hypothesis.
Well, I don't exclude that dinosaurs eventually had feathers. What I think, however, is that God created dinosaurs as their kind and birds as their kind. They coexisted prior to Noah's flood, and that seems plausible to me.
Anything to say, Dapper?
I mean, no, I think everyone knows what I would have to say on that. I've already articulated it.
Okay. So moving on, this was from Nestlig20, and he says, Otangelo says that for an organism size, cell proliferation has to be pre-programmed. How does he explain phenotypic plasticity of sizes without any change in the so-called programming?
Well, there is, as I said previously, adaptations which are pre-programmed for organisms to adapt to the environment, and that has actually to start when life started. And if that wouldn't be so, then life would never gone off the hook. It would immediately have died. So there have to be mechanisms right from the beginning where organisms can adapt to the environment. And in my understanding, this is one more evidence of design, because these mechanisms which permit the organism to adapt, they're very complex, and they also depend on pre-programmed information.
Okay.
I'll just say that phenotypic plasticity flatly contradicts the assertion that cell numeration is pre-programmed in organisms generally. It's just not. And it is true that the ability to be phenotypically plastic is something that is heritable, but it simply doesn't work in the way that Otangelo seems to be expressing, where there's this pre-programmed set number of cells, and we know exactly where every cell is going. That's true for some animals, like I said, tardigrades and some very small worms. But when you get up to macroscopic organisms, even as small as insects, it's just not true.
Yeah, let me just quick add to that. It is not only the number of cells, but also the number of cell division. And there is a precise cell counting of how many divisions that the cell can have. And if it's divided too many times, then you will have cancer and other sort of things. So this is also something which has to be explained. How is that cell counting emerging?
Okay, I have a super chat, so we're going to bump that up to the front. And this is for $4.99 from $4.99, can't talk, from Tyler West. Thank you very much. Otangelo, can you quantify the term information and give units? If you can't, it's a useless term and you should stop using it.
In regards of biology, what we see is that the sequence of nucleotides, it is specified and complex. That is to give an analogy. For example, I'm a machine designer, and if I have to design the plan or the blueprint of a machine, I have to sit down and specify the size, the materials, the parts which have to be then mounted together. So this is all information. And that is precisely what we see in the cell as well, where we have not only genetic, but as well epigenetic information and several signaling pathways which exchange information. And without this, there would be no life. So that has to be explained where that information, which is instructional assembly information, it is complex and specified, where it came from, not only in regards of the biodiversity, but in special as well in regards of the origin of life, where we know that the simplest life form, like for example, Pelagiobacter oblique, it has 1.3 million nucleotides. That's a huge amount of information that has to be come from somewhere. So the big question is, where did it come from?
I think David Db numbers, because he's got a lot of numbers on there, sums this up the way I would. In other words, no. Because remember, there was a question for units and quantity. At no point were we given a mechanism to find a quantity of units of information.
Yeah, as I said, there are scientific papers in regards of attempting to quantify information, and it is very difficult.
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. So this one was for you, Dapper. I believe the name is pronounced Marinanor. I may be mispronouncing that, and if I am, I'm sorry. But he asked, I believe in evolution for lower life forms such as animals, but not humanity. I'm curious if Dapper Dinosaur has ever heard of the gap theory from Genesis 1.
Yes, I am familiar with the gap theory. So the gap theory, very quickly, for those who might not know, says that there is a gap in time between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, and that in Genesis 1:1 there is this pre-Adamic world, and it is in this context that we have the fall of Satan, and then there is the war in heaven that's sort of obliquely referred to, at least according to some people, in the Revelation of St. John. And then after that world is sort of wiped away, which is often seen as sort of the, it might be the KPG, there's different ideas, that then God creates the Adamic world where he creates humans. And there are some ideas that maybe he was preparing the world for humans by creating things that sort of looked and acted a little bit like humans, but weren't really. And that is one explanation for hominins. I don't really, I'm not going to get into the theology behind that because, I don't really talk about theology on this channel, except where it might contradict science. I'll just say this. I do think it's extremely convenient that we have a smooth morphological transition throughout the past few million years of hominins becoming more and more like Homo sapiens, at least if you trace along a particular line. There are always offshoots. And so I find that to be a rather uncompelling case that despite the fact that we have literally everything we would expect to see if humans evolved from or had shared common ancestry with apes, that's just not what happened. But on the other hand, it is sort of an unfalsifiable idea, so I can't really prove it wrong. It just makes me wary of how much you can trust God if he's going to make everything look like humans evolved, which is basically what a lot of the gap theory followed up by a creation of humans later ends up entailing. But like I said, I'm not a gap theorist. If you did want to have a discussion about that in particular, I might be open to it, depending on exactly what topics we're going to talk about, because I'm not going to talk about whether or not I think it's a valid interpretation of that section of the Bible, because I will leave that to the theologians and the priests and the various scholars.
Okay. So our next question was from Cheshire Vic, and she says, I have a question for Otangelo. What was his reason / justification for attempting to out Dapper Dino? Why did he think that was okay to do?
To do what? I didn't understand the question.
I believe this is referencing to one point where you told people that I had told you in private that I was an atheist, while knowing that even if I had done that, I don't make that public intentionally.
Yeah, I think I apologize to you for that. I can do it again. I think it wasn't right to do it. So I am human, I make mistakes. And when I do so, I try to recognize it and apologize and not repeat it.
Okay, well, I'm not asking for an apology, but would it be fair to say that you are acknowledging that that was not the right thing to do? Because I think that might clear it up.
Yes, after I understood the reasons, I agreed. Yes,
Okay.
but it was
Okay.
never my intention at all to harm you in any kind or sort of way.
Look, like I said, I've accepted your initial apology. However, it has been. Look, Cheshire Vic is a friend of mine, and she has her own concerns that don't really depend on my particular feelings about me. So I allow her to have those concerns because I don't get to control other people. But Cheshire Vic, if you're out there, let us know if you think that's an adequate explanation. The explanation is that it wasn't okay, and that's why he's sorry about it. But that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, I would just again to repeat, it is never my intention to harm people. It doesn't go with my Christian belief. So if I'm doing wrong, and it can happen, and I've recognized it, I said already sorry for that, and it hasn't repeated, and I try
No, it has not.
not to repeat it.
And also, I will say that I don't know how sincere your belief is that I told you I was an atheist. I did not do that, but there you go.
Honestly, I really don't like for people to speculate on these things and so forth. For me, it's off topic, and I'm just responding because I was questioned about it, but
Yeah,
that
that's
has
fair.
never come up
Okay,
again.
then we can move on. So the next one wasn't so much of a question, but it was a comment that I was asked to relay to you, Otangelo. This was from Nestling20. He said, off topic, but in any case, Otangelo says that there are 6 different carbon fixation pathways as if it disproves evolution. However, all 6 pathways share the same modules of core metabolism.
Well, that is a very interesting topic. If you want any time to have conversation regards of that, I'm in for it. But I leave this as a question for him. Which one does he think was the first core metabolic pathway? If it was the reverse PCA cycle or the Wood-Lyungdahl cycle, and both they are very complex. They require 9 or 10 proteins, and they had to emerge prebiotically. How he explains that and the transition from natural carbon fixation to enzymatic carbon fixation. The experts like I think it was Orgel or so, they wrote about it, and they said that the metabolic first proposition isn't sound because there is no known way how to go from a prebiotic one to an enzymatic one. This is a very big abiogenesis problem. And of course, then as well, how do you go from 1 or 2 to 6 in special when it comes to the Calvin cycle and so forth?
Okay.
I don't have anything.
I figured as much. So the next question again was for Otangelo from Zach Brannigan, who asked, for Otangelo, do you believe dinosaurs didn't have feathers?
No, I think they might have had feathers. I think there is evidence in the fossil record that some eventually had feathers.
Okay.
I see no problem with that.
Okay, cool. Another question for you, Otangelo, came from DJ Sapson, who asks, why don't bats have feathers? Were bats and birds designed by different gods?
Well, I think bats, they have their specific function. And of course, the big question is, you have insects which can fly. You have even fish which can fly. You have bats that can fly. You have squirrels that can fly. You have snakes that even can fly up to a certain distance. Of course, birds, and all you can say all this convergent evolution. But I think this is all powerful evidence of an intelligent creator, which created all these animals for specific purposes.
So I do have something to add here, which is so the common anti-evolutionist explanation for the observed patterns of homology is common design, common designer. But when we have strongly convergent but very non-homologous structures like the wings of bats, birds, insects, pterosaurs, and perhaps Scansoriopterigids, although that's a very contentious field, so we won't talk about them too much. we don't get the counter argument, which is different design, different designers. But that is the corollary that would be drawn naturally, is that if you have common design means common designer, different design should imply different designer, which itself contradicts the idea that there is a single monotheistic creator for all life. I do think you could probably find ways around that, although they would probably seem kind of like special pleading. But yeah, it's actually extremely good evidence that there is no single designer for life, in that we have vastly different anatomies performing the same function and only taking on superficial resemblances to each other.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a very weak counter argument. I believe that the God that I believe in is unimaginably intelligent. We cannot even fathom it. And there is absolutely no problem for him to create all these different life forms.
Okay, so we got another question. This is for Dapper from Zach Brannigan, who asked, what is the easiest way to...
Oh, sorry, hold on 1 second. Someone's upset.
For dog.
One of the dogs here is becoming very upset about, I have no idea what. I presume that there are murderers that she is chasing away. So, good job. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question for me?
So the question was for you, Dapper, and it was, what is the easiest way to, or what are the easiest ways, rather, to recognize a dinosaur?
Oh, so I'm going to give you the easiest ways that I think work for the average layperson who's not really trying to dig into this at like a technical level. And this will actually lead you somewhat astray when you get to things that are very close to dinosaurs but aren't quite. But overall, like 99% of the time, this is going to work for you. So let's say you're presented with a skeleton, and really you should be probably looking at the skeleton since most of this is a skeletal thing. So if you have legs that are columnar, especially back legs, is really what we're focused on here. So they go straight down under the body. And the femoral head, so where the femur actually goes into the hip, that is distinctly offset and it's not in line with the rest of the femur. That is a really good indication that you're looking at a dinosaur. Also, if the acetabulum, which is where the hip actually fits into, the femur actually fits into the hip, that's just going to be a ring of bone rather than a cup of bone, which is the case for most things. And there are some things that are close to dinosaurs, and they have a hole in there. They have what's called a perforate acetabulum. But if it's not a full actual just ring of bone, you're probably not looking at a dinosaur. You might be looking at something close to a dinosaur. There are also some things, so the pattern of the holes in the skull are important. So dinosaurs all have, with very few exceptions, all have a very prominent antorbital fenestra, so that's a hole in front of the eyes. And then there's two other skill characteristics that are independent of that you can help use. So most theropods have what's called a promaxillary fenestra. So this is a fenestra that is actually entirely in the promaxilla, and it's not actually formed by the interface of different bones. It's kind of a weird thing. So if you see that, you're looking at a theropod. Also, there's a predentary bone, which is actually a bone that grows in front of the dentary. It's a single unpaired bone. And if you're looking at that, you're looking at an ornithischian. And that's not going to tell you, that's not a dinosaur thing, but if you see those, you know you're already within Dinosauria. Some other things that you can look for are the sacral vertebrae are going to be 3 or more. And so those are the vertebrae between the two iliac bones of the hip. Also, there's going to be a strong connection between the ribs of the sacral vertebrae and the actual ilium. So those are going to be tightly connected, and in some cases actually fused into a single mass of bone. There are some other things, but all of them usually require you to get way closer than you're likely to at a museum or anything. So yeah, the last thing I want to say is also look to see if the teeth actually grow out of individual sockets. If they do, that's another good indication, but again, that's not perfect. But when you take all that together, at a museum, you should be reliably able to determine whether or not you're seeing a dinosaur or not a dinosaur. There might be a few things that'll trick you, like maybe like Lagasucids or Silosaurs, but most museums aren't big on those taxa, so I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Okay. Moving on, we have a question from Ugly German Troots for Otangelo. And he asks, can Otangelo tell us where in the Bible it says that God designed anything? My Bible says he told the ground, water, or air to, quote unquote, bring forth. no blueprint mentioned anywhere.
Yes, we also read in John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And through his word, everything was created. So that is an indication that God used information in order to create the universe and fine-tune it and instantiate the laws of physics, and in special, of course, life and biodiversity. So information is very fundamental, and it is a big issue and demands an explanation. Where does all that information come from, starting from the laws of physics to the genetic and epigenetic information, which is basic and necessary for life to thrive?
Okay.
I think we probably only have time for like one more.
There's only 2 left in my list.
Oh, let's just get through them then.
Okay. So David B22585 asked, what hypothetical observation would be against an intelligent designer in Otangelo's view?
If we could have a good explanation about how instructional assembly information and irreducibly complex machines and cells could be instantiated without intelligence whatsoever. If it could be shown by hypotheses which can be tested that this is possible, then that no intelligence hypothesis is a more capable mechanism instead of intelligence to bring forward these things, then of course the no intelligence hypothesis would be the more plausible one.
You have anything to add, Dapper?
No, I think that's good.
Okay. So the last one is for you, Dapper. It's from Andrew Cumming, who asks, were early dinosauromorphs and dinosaurs in the Triassic speciating rapidly and using many convergent features, hence why their phylogenies are so difficult to resolve?
The answer is probably. We do see a lot of diversity in dinosauromorphs and actual dinosaurs. In some cases, we have a lot of dinosauromorphs filling niches that later would be typically filled by dinosaurs proper. And we also have a lot of radiation of various pseudosuchian lineages, and even the synapsids aren't really out of the picture at this point. We still have a lot of dicynodont and cynodont diversity in the Triassic. The dicynodonts don't make it out of the Triassic, but the cynodonts certainly do. And so the Triassic, it really does come across, at least in our current understanding, as a period of a whole lot of radiations and areas in which organisms arrive at forms that would later be converged upon by only distantly related lineages. So you have the first things that sort of really look like crocodilians, even though they're definitely not. You get some of the first things that look like big hippo-like herbivores, and I mean big in some cases. You also get some of the first like really theropod-looking organisms, although again, a lot of them are pseudosuchians or dinosauromorphes or things like that. So yeah, it's sort of a hotbed of evolution, and a lot of that is simply because it is after the Great Dying. Almost everything was wiped out. So as new ecosystems establish themselves, who happens to be in a good position to get a new niche is going to be hard to predict if you're just starting at the Permian.
Okay. Well, with that, I didn't get tagged with any more questions, I don't think. So I think that about wraps us up.
All right, Otangelo, do you have anything that's coming up on your channel or blog or anything that you want to tell people about?
No, but if someone wants to engage me, having conversation or a debate as I had on your channel, then you're welcome to do so. Yeah, eventually you can put my email in the description.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if you'd like, I will absolutely do that. So guys,
yeah, I'll do that afterwards.
That'll be in the description a few minutes after we go off air. So if you're watching in the future, it'll already be there. If you're watching now, please just wait a few, like 2 or 3 minutes after we go off air, and I'll stick that right in the description. So sorry for not having done that, although I don't, well, I'm not sorry, because if I did it and you didn't want me to, then I would be sorry. So there you go. I'll just talk a little bit about what's coming up on my channel. So next Tuesday should be Eric with Erica. I need to confirm that with Erica. But if it's not, then it would probably end up just being a Kent with Bent. Then Thursday, plan right now is to release Helping Cindy Licken episode 2. And I really don't want to go farther than that. I'm trying to line up something for a week from today. It may or may not happen. And like you guys know, Saturday is, it's not a guarantee that you're going to get a stream or anything on Saturday. It's a, if I can get something together, then there will be one. And you guys, there's been a lot of stuff I've managed to get together, but now we're kind of at the end of where I have like pre-booked things. I might actually try to get Cindy Lincoln back on to have a discussion about a particular topic, because we've had some conversations off air about things like science and evolution and things like that. So it might be fun if she's willing to have that kind of talk with you guys, and you guys can ask questions. And remember, we were being nice to Cindy because Cindy has had a pretty horrible run of it in the last few years. And I don't think that she is being dishonest. I think she is honest and misinformed. Unlike Kent Hovind, who I think is in fact dishonest. In fact, many creationists agree with me on that. So that's it for me. Mr. Wilford, do you have anything you want to
No,
plug?
not really.
Okay.
Also, Nestlig20 wants to know if there's going to be an after show or not.
The plan is currently no. There are other things that I need to take care of. If there's a really big push for an after show, I might schedule one, but it probably wouldn't be today, which means there probably isn't a whole lot of point to doing it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Sorry, it's just I gave 2 hours on this day, and there's not. I kind of have to stop it at that. But I do appreciate the interest in a after show. So unless there's anything else that has come through, I think we're going to get out of here.
All right on time.
All right, well, thank you, everybody, and here are the end credits. I just want to take a moment to thank my channel members and my patrons on Patreon. They really help keep the lights on here, and I want to thank those pledging $20 or above, especially Bob Knob, Bent Hovind, Ian Chen, Chris Love, Sphincter of Doom, The Venerable Bede, Pat L. Dennis, and Res Instance. Without the support of those whose names you see on screen right now, the channel simply wouldn't exist as it does now, and I certainly wouldn't be able to do 2 to 3 videos a week for over a year and a half now. If you would like to help support and make it so that this channel is something that can keep going, there is a link to join below the video, as well as a link to the Patreon in the channel description. If pledging money isn't right for you, please just hit like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and share my videos. That really helps my channel grow.